Hi, welcome back to CS170. We're going to be covering some more JavaScript for week 6. Um, so let me come over to here. So if you want to try to follow along, you want to just pause my video every so often. You can do this. I'm going to create this. I'm going to save this up onto my folder. You can use it for reference, but again, for you to get your own practice, I suggest you try and do this. So go ahead and think about this. We're going to set this up with the HTML. You probably have done this with the other assignments, but I'm going to just do this quickly for you here. So you can see I already created this. Here, chapter 18 events, text boxes HTML. And like I said before, you have file name with extensions that I showed here. And so that's why you see all of these file extensions here. So I might do something like this. Create a new text file. And then I would say something like index2.html. You'll say you want to change it. You change it, and now you have a new HTML file. Okay, so I already did this to create a file to hold the information for chapter 18 event text box HTML, which I put up into my notepad here. I have all of this here. Okay, and that should be it. All right, so like I said, I'm gonna do all of the stuff on online just so you can see the results side by side. But later on, I will have this HTML file, which I'll put into my folder up on Canvas. Okay, so I'm gonna leave that for now. And I'm gonna come back to here, js.do, and this is where I set up all of the same code that we're gonna go through with the PowerPoint today. So as I come along, you can set up your HTML file. You can follow along and try to do these different things. So the first bit here is your usual skeleton, right? So you do all of this. So you can just take this and put this into your HTML file. The main bit here is this style. All right, you might remember some of the style that I showed you for the CSS, where we had the CSS file, which was in the line right above here. We referenced that, but then we put in a style here to override it. So here, we're just going to include the style here. You're not going to include the CSS file. And yeah, so things like we set the background color, in this case to be Dodger blue. We set the font. We set the color to be midnight blue. We got the text alignment. Everything's a center. And we got the fonts. Okay, and that's going to play out in a second. You'll see. Okay, so if you're following along, go ahead and put into your HTML file and just do this. Okay. All right. So here we go. Here's a script. And the first concept that we're going to talk about here is text boxes. So that's these guys right here, where it says enter your name below. This is a text box. That's a text box. And then this is just showing the output here. Okay? And this is what the code looks like. Okay? And here you remember this from your HTML, so that's fine. Here's all your carriage returns here. Here's where you want to say enter your name, which is right here. And then here's the key piece of code here. Okay. So you want to say input style. Okay. And you're going to be capturing in as a text box. And you're going to initialize this value to be blank. Right. So here's all the different things you want to capture. Right. So here's a font. There you're capturing a type text. You have the ID. You have the value. Oops, slid off of this. And than the size of the box itself. Okay. Now there's another thing here. It's called onChange. Right. So this is kind of stepping into a concept called event-driven programming. Okay. In the old days, I guess things used to be you would program and it would be like a block of code that would go from the top to the bottom, right? I guess you would call it procedural programming. That's just an aside. You don't have to worry too much about that. Really, for the context of this course, you just want to understand that this is what we consider event-driven program. And what that means is, in this case, this is an on-change event, right? So on-change, when you type in whatever you have here, and let's say you click out of it or you hit return or something like that, do something, right? Do some code. So in this case, you remember the accumulators that we did before, where you have, let's say, a value of a, and you do a plus b, and you store the results of a plus b into a. And so a is sort of accumulating the results. It's part of the calculation, so you have the a plus b, but then it's also accumulating the results. So that's why they call these things accumulators. But this is how values are assigned. It's like general procedures or best practice, I guess. So you could just create a whole nother value if you want and store it, but generally the practice is this. So they're saying the text box hello dot value equals the text box hello dot value plus text box name. Okay, so what's text box hello is this thing down here. Okay, and what's text box name is this one right up here. Okay, so if you think about it, what is it going to do? Okay, take a minute to think about that for a second. This plus sign means concatenate, right? That's what we did from last week, right? So you're taking this text, concatenating or adding in this text, okay? And you can see down here, the value's already been initialized to be hello, and then there's a comma here, right? So that's what happens. When you initialize the value, up here we set the value to be blank. Here we set the value to be hello. So you see hello here. Okay, all the other stuff is the same, right? So the font size, the type it is. Well, this is different. You have to call it a different name. You obviously can't have both of these to be the same name, right? So they're calling this one text box hello. The other thing to note is this read only. So what read only means is I can't go into this box and type anything. The only way the values change in this is if I set the value here, okay? So this is kind of like a common thing to do to kind of display things. So you create this text box here, and then based on different things, you'll set the value, and then it'll come out to here. It doesn't. This box is never used for someone to type something in there. Okay, this is almost like sort of like a little window for you to display values that you set this text box hello to be. Okay, and so the main thing here is you identify these two boxes, what the values are. In this case, this is a read-only. It's, like I said, you could think of it as a display box. And then this thing is where you actually do something. So in this case, you're going to put your name in. Once you put your name in, you put in a return, or you touch something out of it. Then it's going to create this onChange event. And then the onChange event is going to set this text box hello value to be hello, comma, plus this. Okay, so let's see that in action. So I actually set this up already. Okay, see where we are here. So we have text box hello and text box hello like that. Okay, and actually let me increase the size on this. Maybe that might help things a little bit. Okay, so hopefully you can see this a little bit better. And this is exactly this code that we just looked at on the PowerPoint. Okay, and let's type in this, and then I hit return, and you see it does exactly what I told you it would. It says hello, and then plus, and this, and you're good. Okay, so there is like a little bit of an issue here, but let me just pause a second, give you a moment to kind of think about what just happened here. Okay, so here's the text box, right? And here's the other text box, right? So this text box, this is the display, right? That's why it's set to be read-only. We've initialized it to say hello. Then here, once I've done something, I've typed in my name, then the onChange, which I did a carriage return, or I could touch out of it, same thing. It assigned a value to be this plus this, and that's how come you got hello Arnold. Okay, so I hope everyone can follow that. Now there is like a little bit of issue here. If I go back to here and I do this again, okay, you can see what happened. It took the old one and then it just kept on adding more to it. Okay, so even if I were to do this and then touched out, this would still be stuck here. So this never gets cleaned up. So that's a little bit of a problem, which I'm going to address in a second. Okay, so so I'm back here. So the next thing that you learn with this is how to do a button. And you hear a lot of things with people learning a programming language or doing whatever, is this whole thing about hello world, right? So that's what we got here. And so you can see similar type of thing. Now we have input type. Now we're saying button. Okay, so that's a distinction. Let's come back to here. Right now you have this, and it's a type text. Okay, now come back to here. This type button. Okay, not really a great name here, but we'll call it button 1. Okay, and then the value is click me, which is this here. Okay, and then on click, which is when I click on this, it'll execute this, which is an alert box that says hello world. All right, so let's see if I can do that here. And so let me see, hello world, and so I already pre-did this, and let me put that to here and run this. Okay, so I blanked everything out and I have click me. Okay, now what I did here, I did a little bit more than what this did. Right, this here is just to say hello world. I went ahead and did a few more things in here. So when you do this on click, it's not that you can just run one command. You can actually run a series of commands, which is what I'm doing here. And so here's the button, right? Same thing. Here's the value, click me, which is fine. And then on click event, we're going to do hello world, which is fine. But then I added 2 more things. One is to reset this to be hello comma, which is what it was at the beginning, and then the text box name equal to blank, right? So that addresses that other issue that we had before. So for example, I did this, and okay, fine, and then I did this, and then it kind of appended onto it again, which is the problem I pointed out before. But now I do click me. Number 1, you see hello world. Okay, then once I click OK, then I reset everything. Right, so I thought this was a good demonstration of a couple of things. One, the fact that I could put in multiple statements here, right, with the semicolon, don't forget that. And 2, that I was able to set the values, or clear out the values in this case, of these boxes here based on me clicking that button. Okay, so these type of interactions are fairly common, so that's why we're going over them right now. So this is another piece of example code you can look at as you start to work through this. Okay, so let's come back to here. Now, for this chapter, this is basically introduction JavaScript. Last week we did the variables. Now we're looking at some basic what we call GUI components. Right? These are components that are very common that you'll be using and manipulating. Right? So collecting information. Someone has a screen. They're going to put in some information, and you'll be taking that to do some calculations. So these are very basic components that you'll be working with. Okay, so this is radio buttons. Okay, the key thing about radio buttons is, and you've probably seen it on other websites that you've played with, is it'll present a list of different options, right? So maybe if you ran SurveyMonkey or something like that, you'll see these type of things, right? Multiple choice questions or whatever, right? And then you would only be able to click one of these. So the way the system is set up, as long as you name this whole set of radio boxes to be the same value, the same name I should say, it will know that you're only going to have to take one of them, right? So if I click on peaches, like if I was clicked on apples before, it would get blanked out, and I'll demonstrate that for you in a second. Okay, so let's go through this line by line. So in this line, right, again, look at the type. Type equals to radio. Okay, so that's what this is, radio buttons. And you see this, fruit, fruit, fruit. Okay, so that's the same. And then the first one is for apples, which is this. Okay, and if I click, this is another event, right? On-click event, similar to what you just saw for the button and for the text box. It executes some code, right? So in this case, we're saying box1 dot value equals to value. Okay, and remember we set the value to be apples. Okay, so this is how it hangs together. So you click on this, and then it knows to take the value and set it here. Okay, so it takes this value here, and then this box1 dot value is really this thing down here. Okay, and look, we have the input type, and look at the text, right? It's text, right? And it's just like what we did for the other two examples, where you're taking some on-click event and setting the value. Okay, so initially it will start off at blank. Okay, but later on, once you click on one of these, it's going to take that value, box1 dot value, here's the name, box1 dot value, and set that. And again, look at this. It's set to be read-only. Okay, again, no one is going to be able to type in something into here. It's only going to be set based on clicking these radio buttons. And so these other two are nothing special. It's really just, assigning something for bananas and peaches, right? But the logic is still the same. So on click, it's going to take the value over to here and over to here. Okay, and just note here, these things is essentially what shows up on the screen here. Okay, here, and let me open this up. So I'm going to take this and goes over to here. Comment this guy out, and there we go. So, well, let's see what happens. I click apples, and we got apples. Got bananas, and we got peaches. Okay, now I didn't implement this, but you can imagine I could do the same exact thing as I did before, where I can do the click me to blank this out. Okay, so you could almost think of, I set up this click me as a way to reset all of these other things. Because if I don't do that, then I'm kind of stuck, right? So I always have one of these selected. There's no way for me to, unselect it and clear all these out. At the same time, there's no way for me to get this to be blank. I could do that by doing the click me. Okay, and so for those of you that are paying attention right now, this is going to be part of your extra credit. So I'm going to continue on in a second, then we'll finish up on this. But one part of the extra credit will be to take this code and set the click me to clear out this and this. Now the other bit that I mentioned before is you have the text here. This is just text, right? So you might want to play around to see if there's different things you can format these in different ways, right? Maybe you want to make it bold, maybe you want to make it italics, whatever. So in some ways this is kind of meshing together what you learn from HTML and what we're learning in JavaScript. Okay, so you take a note of that for the extra credit. We're gonna do this basic code. Like I said, I'm gonna give you the file, but you should try to do this yourself. Just try to create the HTML file, put all the code that we've just been covering for this lecture, and then add on what I just suggested. Change the click me to reset all these guys down here, and just play around with the formatting a little bit, right, on these things here. Maybe you can change one of these to be italics, one of these to be bold, one of these to be a different font, a larger font, whatever. Just play around with the formatting a little bit on these type of things. Okay, so you can make some pretty interesting things. It doesn't even have to be like one word, right? It could be like a little sentence here or something. Okay, anyway, let's come back to here. Alright, so now we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to actually try to have it so that a user inputs something. We're going to do some calculations off of that. So in this case, we're going to be doing a temperature conversion, right? Simple little thing. So all of this is incorporating what we've just been talking about for this lecture, right? So now you have a text box, right? And we call it fbox, right? So capturing the Fahrenheit temperature, right? And we initialize it to blank, a couple carriage returns, and then now we have a button, right? So you have a type with a button, and we're going to call it calculate button, okay? You might notice, like, someone tried to come up with a different way to kind of name these. So there are certain conventions, like depending on where you work at and do whatever, where you might have either a letter or like a word that's kind of put together with the variable so that people look at it and they can say, oh, this is a variable that's associated with a button, right? So in this case, we're saying, oh, this button is going to do a calculation, right? So before we talked about a variable, it could be like height of rectangle or color of rectangle or something like that. In this case, you have something where you have the type of the element that you're using or component that you're using associated with the variable. So that's a certain convention. Again, there's nothing forcing you to do it. I could just call this to be ABC, right? But this is part of like helping other people who's looking at your code to understand a little bit more. It's like documenting your code a little bit. Okay, so it's a little bit of an aside. You're not going to really be tested on this or anything like that, but it's just something interesting to note in terms of how people think about naming variables. Okay, naming a variable ABC is generally not a good idea from a documentation perspective. Okay, so I won't beat that dead horse. So in this case, we have on click, and we have it, we just set it to be blank, right? And then we define the variable. This is the Fahrenheit temperature, okay? And notice this thing here, right? We're basically what they call casting or setting this to be a number, okay? And we'll see what happens if we don't do it that way. And we have fbox.value, okay? And then we did define another variable called Celsius, okay? And Celsius is just a formula that you probably know from your early days in school. You're taking the Fahrenheit, subtracting 32, and multiplying by this, okay? And then you have the value, and again, notice this. You're gonna see this a few more times. It's this dot, you remember I did the square root function before, the math.square root. This is kind of a similar idea. So you're taking this and 2 fixed, right? And then all that means is you're taking it out to 2 decimal places, okay? And then you have the Celsius degrees equivalent is, and then you have your text box here, and again, note the read only, right? So it's not really a formal term, but I kind of call it a display box, right? So this is where you're just going to display stuff, okay? So let's see what happens when we punch all that code in. So I'm going to take this out. I already typed this guy in, right? So let me move this over. All right, we reset everything, okay? So let's just put in a number. So I'm going to put in 45. I'm going to click Calculate Celsius. So that's the Calculate button here. And we come up with 7.22. Okay. So did I say this was a blank? That's not a blank, right? I'm not initializing it to be blank, right? This is a double quote, I should say. So double quote, and this is each line of the calculation, right? And then it's populating this output here on this one, right? Cbox dot value centigrade box dot value equals to this calculation. And look, so you did the 2 fixed to be 2, so that's how come you got 2 decimal places here, right? But note what I said here. It says number to fbox.value. So let's see what happens if I did something that's not a number. Okay, so you got this NaN. So that's an error. That's probably not the best way to capture this as an error. Okay, but the idea here is that maybe we want to put in something where if it figures out that it's not a number, that it pops up like an error or something. Okay, so you remember the alert box that was up here? Where's that alert box here? Here we go, alert hello world. Okay, so nice little thing to do for your extra credit would be to take this code here, and once I do the click and I do a little check here to say if it's not a proper number, it pops up an alert box and then blanks things out, and then that's it. So it's a little bit of an extra credit. Like, don't stress yourself out if you can't do it. If you can't, do this, it's what they call conditional, right? So you do it if it's not a number, do the alert box, and that's it, right? And then else, you continue on the rest of the code because then you have a real number. Okay, so I haven't taught the conditional yet. I'll cover that. But you can look at it as extra credit. So it's something you can look up on the internet and see if you can do that. You can call it exception handling, I guess. So a little bit of extra credit there. Now the other last part of the extra credit, and I'd like to finish the lecture with this, is we already did the Celsius to Fahrenheit, right? So now figure out if we can do reverse, right? Here's a radio. Right, so you remember what happens with radio, you can only do one or the other, you can't do them at the same time. Right, so this kind of makes it more generic. Before, you're only doing this, you're only doing Fahrenheit to Celsius. Now, let's try to see if we can go both ways with this, depending on which of these radio boxes I collect. Okay, and then you would be able to change this, right, and change this. Okay. And see if you can figure that out. I'll post a response to it at some point, like maybe next week after the extra credit, right? So hopefully everybody follow along with this. So let me recap. First, we talked about a text box and how to manipulate the values here, and we talked about event-driven programming. And then we talked about buttons. Still event-driven programming with the on-click. Then we talked about radio buttons. Okay. Then we did some calculation, right, with the Celsius calculation with this. Okay. And so for the bonus or the extra credit, if you want to take the code, I'm going to post a file up shortly with my starter code. I still encourage you to do your own if you can. So one thing is where you have this click me button is to reset these radios, right? Hit the reset for this. And then the other thing is to put in exception handling over here. So if I put in something that's not a number for the calculation, give me an error and then don't do anything else, so I don't end up with this NaN at the bottom here. And then the last part of the extra credit would be to come up with this. Okay, to basically extend this so that I can either convert Fahrenheit to Celsius or Celsius to Fahrenheit. Okay, so hopefully everybody followed along with this. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a shout. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing your extra credit come through. And good luck with the exam coming up. If you have any questions on that, feel free to send me an email. We can arrange a WebEx, or I can answer your questions directly. Okay, have a good night. Thank you.